Radio, and we're absolutely delighted now. We've got, now we were having an argument about your name. Is it Schoenfeld or Schoenfeld?
Schoenfeld.
Schoenfeld, right. Sean, so neither. Schoenfeld. So welcome, Eva, and we've already got Justin here with us, so we're absolutely delighted to see you. You've come in out of the rain, you're freezing. You've come all the way from Edinburgh in this terrible weather, so we're absolutely delighted to have you with us, and folk have been really enjoying hearing Justin speak, and we're delighted to welcome you as well, Eva. So I'll pass you over to Marlene, and she'll sort of lead the interview. So, but thank you so much for making your way through here today.
Yeah. Just shaking Eva's hand, and it's freezing. It is definitely kind of really freezing. So if we were just been. You're telling us a bit about your work with the Forest Peoples. Forest Peoples Programme, it's called, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And in the background to this whole series is that our common home plan that Colin Wales brought out. That's what kind of prompted us to start contacting people like yourselves. So I've got that in the back of mind, and one of the sections of that is all about the land. So if there's one thing that needs reformed in Scotland, it's land. Land ownership. Half of it that's owned by 500 people, and then behind that, a society that's like the rest of the UK, huge inequalities in terms of financial resources and everything. Much higher inequality than say in Scandinavia kind of countries. So I've got that. So that's kind of what's in my mind, and I know you're working with the Forest Peoples Programmes, and then I noticed this is on your LinkedIn. Because you have to get your information from somewhere. I thought I must find out what I can find out about Justin. But I was really intrigued by this because on your LinkedIn profile you've just got these two questions, and the first one is, how much is land reform and the restoration of the commons, community ownership and resilience, how much is all that at the core of the push required to rejuvenate democracy, restore social, economic, ecological well-being? Now, when I hear things like, restoring, maybe you need to tell us what you mean by the commons exactly, but when I hear that, I immediately start to think Africa, or I might think bits of South America. And I was reading that and I thought, come on, Scotland. And Europe, it's not as if Europe's outside of those sort of concerns. No. So that was the first question. And the second kind of aspect was, well, how much more can be achieved if we got on with that in the global north in order to have a knock-on effect on what's, what would help and what the people in the global south actually want to be doing. So could you just maybe talk a wee bit about that, and maybe it would be good to say what you mean by the commons as a term.
Well, well over half the landmass of the world is managed by people living in commons systems. So most of the world is managed in terms of people's relationship to the land by people who are living basically in a common system. Is when the rules are set by the community. How we take care of each other is decided by the community rather than by somebody else. It's decided in a whole variety of ways, depending on the society, the culture, but we tend to think of the state or corporations being in charge. Yeah. But the commons is actually how most people across most of the world live. And then aspects of our own world, if you think about the libraries, if you think about all sorts of things, ways that we live, actually that level of the commons is what goes on. And I find in my own community, or our own community in Portobello, that when people realise that level really matters, it comes alive and it can then decide a lot of things which otherwise are left to the market or the state. And so as soon as you take on the fact that we can make decisions collectively and reach agreements collectively, then you can start to reclaim. So that's why we led on the first urban community buyout in Scotland, was in Portobello, was just actually realising we can do this. And people were like, no, you can't. Well, we can. We can do whatever we like if we collectively agree to and then push for that. So the commons is about managing your life in a way that takes care of those around you too, rather than assuming that if I win, you lose, or if you win, I lose. It's like, how can we collectively win? And then land reform is fundamental. So in Kenya, where I work, there's lots of conflict going on, and people say it's about tribalism, And then if you look at it, it's not about tribes, it's about land. And if you look at it, it's not about land, it's about the fact that the 3 ex-presidents have taken most of the land in Kenya. So everybody's pushed off most of the land. So land is at the heart, like you say in Scotland, land's absolutely, there's plenty of land for everybody if we actually didn't have it controlled by 400 whatever people, but was actually back in communities' hands. And that's not just in the country, that's in the city. So yeah, land reform is, and our relationship to the land, our sense of being able to be, our sense of reassurance that we're not dependent on a wage, we're not dependent on somebody else giving us something. It's like that. This land is basically what sustains us. So we have a sense of abundance rather than a sense of scarcity. And this system works on scarcity. However high up you are in it, you think, God, I've got to be higher up to be safe. And you're never safe.
Yeah.
It's just insecure. So having one where you know that basically you're depending on the well-being of the land and people around you, it's a completely different universe. It's the normal one. It's how humans have mostly lived and mostly live across the world.
And do you think that's still the case, given the human population numbers at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. No, so there's always these scarce, and also human population numbers are there because of scarcity. So the driver for having lots of kids is because you're fearful that if you haven't got kids to support you in your old age, you're stuffed. Yeah. So it's the other way around. It's like if you carry on being run by scarcity, then you carry on having an increase in population. But actually, if you have a sense of reassurance around it, then people can. And that's why the population increase drops. The more education that women get, but we say that, but it's much more than education for women symbolises a sense of equalising and a sense of taking care in that way. But talking about education for women, I think I'll shut up.
I was just thinking, it would be good to bring Eva. Just before we bring Eva in, I've got a question here. I don't know, maybe you could answer it, Eva. We've got a question here from Paul, who's listening in, and he's asking, what impact has it had on your movement, the police trying to label Extinction Rebellion as extremists? Has that had any impact on what you do? Or
it's a good question. I don't know whether you've picked up anything on that. You have, because I haven't particularly. I've been around a few conversations and people think, oh my God, it might stop people from joining us, and a few other people saying, well, I joined up because of that because I thought it was nonsense. So I don't know on balance. I
noticed a shift in the public's behaviour towards us and the police straight after that happened, which was that we were Baillie Gifford, which is a big investment fund that invests huge amounts in the fossil fuel industry and invests the MP's pension funds in that too. So we were doing a demonstration outside there in Edinburgh, and the public was extraordinarily supportive of us, as they normally are, but they were also really critical of the police, which I haven't experienced before. So there was a shift in attitude of going, why are they why are they there? They were kind of going, why are there 12 of them? I say, well, it's great having 12 of them. They're a great backdrop. Look at them with their big yellow shirts. It's fine. It creates a nice picture for the media and so on. It's no problem having them there. But the public was really angry that we were being labelled as extremist by the police. Yeah. And so suddenly the police were being put on the front line in a way that they haven't been. So there's been a shift in that sense, that people are kind of going, who are the extremists? It's not these peaceful protesters. No. It's those in power who are driving us over this edge. So
and in particular up here, when it's, I was going to say perceived, but it is actually factually true. It's it's probably being driven by a Tory government in Westminster. So that's how we frame it.
Yes,
so you immediately get... You literally get sympathy.
Totally, you got 80% sympathy immediately for that. Yeah. But there is a sense of people lots being frightened, though. So that was the purpose of it, was to get people to think, I don't want to associate with these people because how will I be seen? And that definitely, there is a truth to that. So I shouldn't just say, it's had the impact I've described for 80%, but then for some people it's been like, well, I don't want to be associated. Not that they are extremists, but if they're going to be seen as that, I don't want to be seen as that. So, and that was the intention all along, and that's why they put it out. They then withdrew it, but the point was it was out there. They wanted it to be out there, so that it's the elephant in the room thing. Nobody mentions it, But I think it's been very counterproductive for them, but it has had an effect.
Good. So, and Eva, what about yourself? Have you been involved in this movement right from the very start? The extinction I can't say that. Extinction Rebellion Scotland.
Well, yes, we were both watching a video of Gail Bradbrook together in sort of what it must have been of October last year, and she was saying, we're in rebellion and we're going to be going to London and we're going to. I don't know.
Tell us who Gail Bradbrook is.
Gail Bradbrook. She's one of the kind of founder members of Extinction Rebellion,
right?
And a really powerful speaker. So it was quite something to hear people saying seriously that they were going to be out on the streets.
Yeah.
Because I'd been wanting that to happen for years, but had never seen that there was the energy to do that.
Take
So
that
it's-
direct action.
Yeah, yeah.
And it seems to be like when you see people that you get, it's quite amazing. You've got such a range. You know, you've got people like 80-year-old, very kind of conservative with a small c, traditional people saying, well, I've never really done anything like this in my life before, but I'm doing it now, as well as, you know, young, you know, teenage or 20-year-olds. You've got this range of, you know, people that feel so strongly. Has that been your experience here in Scotland?
Yeah, there is a real mix. It could be more of a mix, but it's certainly, you know, it's been really heartening to have been part of the kind of climate movement for years and years, and suddenly have this kind of shot in the arm, because you know it was very depressing going on marches over years, and it was just like a handful of you, and you know, you're thinking, God, this is so important. Where is everybody?
Well, do you have any sort of sense yourself about where the source of that energy is come from? I mean, maybe it's just because it's so much more obvious. You know, you don't have to read very far to come across evidence for climate change, but also, well, you just have a look at the state of, you know, southern England and Wales today, actually. So maybe it's just partly that it's impinging on us much more. But, you know, I read the article that you both wrote about Extinction Rebellion Scotland, and I was struck. You know, obviously it was something you feel really strongly about, but I was just looking at, you know, I was picking up on words like barricades and blockades, and actually I began to think, well, actually this is bringing normal city life to a halt, or some part of it anyway. I mean, the North Bridge is such an obvious place to do it, isn't it? It's such, it's, you know, not hard to do it. But it kind of felt to me a bit reminiscent of, you know, if you go, well, I can go back to 1968 Paris, you know, student protest. Not that I was there, but you know, Vietnam War protests, we mentioned anti-apartheid kind of thing. All those movements, there was a certain point where they came alive. And something like that's happened now with the climate one. And you know, I've been over to Edinburgh for Stop Climate Chaos Scotland marches and things. And you know, there was a fair number of people there and everything. But it's a very, very kind of different kind of mindset to Extinction Rebellion. So, do you think it is just that it's more impinging on us, or?
I think there's lots of different things. I think there was an extraordinary kind of series of events. Was it 2018, when there was a really, really scarily hot summer, just a weird summer. And then there was the IPCC report with the 12 years in it. Yeah, and Extinction Rebellion was just like there, ready to happen. But I'm also thinking about our son, who, you know, has seen us kind of diddling around with, you know, sort of normal kind of campaigning, and also with transition movement. Yeah, kind of doing stuff in communities and putting in community orchards and stuff. And I hadn't really been aware that, I don't know if you had, that he'd been basically saying, well, that's not going to cut it. So he had never been particularly involved with any of that stuff, and I just thought he wasn't very interested. But as soon as Extinction Rebellion came along, he said, well, that's what I've been waiting for. I haven't seen that anything's going to change this except a revolution, and here we go. This is.
So it's a rebellion. It's not. It's not direct action in that sense of, like, you know, or a Stop Climate Chaos kind of march, whatever. Which we've all done, and they're great, and we're all for them. But it's just different. It's saying, if you don't do it, we'll do it. That's the difference between a rebellion and a direct action. Direct action is to say, you must do this. We need you to do this. And this is saying, you must do this. We need you to do this. And if you don't do it, we'll do it. So that's a whole different shift. It's just like, and so then how you do that and how you shift from just rebelling to actually making sure the whole thing changes, well, that's another question, but that's the energy behind it.
That's a big question, though, isn't it? I mean, I've been part of it's a Facebook climate action kind of group, and the thing that we have in common, two things we have in common in this group, I know quite a lot of the people, not just through the group, is that, you know, we're interested in that whole subject, and also we're also all Buddhists, so we kind of come at it from a particular kind of angle. But I've been involved in discussions there with people saying, well, I can see there's tactics being used, but what's the long-term strategy for Extinction Rebellion? Now, that may not be a question that's even relevant to Extinction Rebellion. It might not be your job to come up with the strategy. But, how do you move into the next stage of it? Because if we're not, say, Nicola Sturgeon doesn't ever quite kind of do it, how will the rest of us manage it?
Well, it's interesting. There's two halves of an answer to that question.
Okay,
and I guess the first bit is that Extinction Rebellion's strategy is to pass this over to a democratic process, which they're not seeing. We're not seeing that our politicians are taking this nearly as seriously as it needs to be taken. But citizens' assemblies are kind of deliberative democratic techniques that you may well have discussed here at other points. So our demand number 3, which has actually been met in Scotland, is that the government sets up a citizens' assembly on climate change, and they're the ones who will decide what we need to do.
Decision. Yeah.
And in ways, that makes a lot of sense for politicians, because basically, if we're going to take this seriously, there are some pretty swinging changes that we're going to need to make, and there's very few politicians that are going to want to take that on the chin. But if some kind of external body says, well, yeah, based on the evidence, these bunch of normal people think that it's worth doing whatever these things are, rationing, most likely, of one sort or another, then politicians are potentially in a position where they could respond to that.
In a way, it sort of enables them
Yeah.
to move into difficult areas otherwise.
But it only works if the Citizen Assembly has the right to decide on really fundamental change.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing in the UK one, there's a UK Citizen Assembly happening in Birmingham, and it's really narrow. They're giving no remit to really take on board the scale of the problem and of the changes needed. So it's a panacea. It's just
Who set that one up?
set up by 6 committees of the UK Parliament.
So,
six
so
committees
select committees.
Yes, select committees set that up. But it's not a UK government, and also it's set by select committees from the last Parliament, so it's a very different
Right.
Parliament there now. But they've set it up.
It's a start.
It's a start, but it's also not a start as well. So
Yeah.
it's good that they have taken seriously the demand, but it's not good that they have only met it in a pathetic way. So in Scotland, we need the Climate Citizen Assembly, to have the remit to look at, well, what's the cause of this problem? What's the structural cause? And what do we need to do about that? How do we need to address that?
And that will be focusing on Scotland.
Yeah.
Presumably not only maybe Scotland, because we have a footprint elsewhere,
Yeah.
and we affect other people's footprints. But presumably the prime focus is here in Scotland.
Well, it's what we can do in Scotland, which includes
Yeah.
how do we deal with imports of embedded carbon from elsewhere? How do we deal with the energy? How do we deal with the waste? So it's about Scotland's place in the world. It's not just about what's happening in Scotland, but it's what can we do in Scotland.
Yeah.
And that doesn't just include what's devolved. That includes what should we do as a society. We shouldn't be limited by the kind of happenstance of the structure we've got around us. We need to decide for ourselves what we should do, and if that requires more power than we've got at the moment, then we need to take that power. But we're not using the power at the moment that we've got, and that's the issue. It's like we should be using the power. We need to be demanding of our government to use the power it's got, and we need to have much more power to be able to do this.
Is there an example of power that's held at the moment that's not being used?
Yes, so around the North, just very straightforwardly, around extraction of fossil fuels from under the North Sea. Now, that's something that's reserved to Westminster in terms of energy use, but Scotland has the say in the planning. And so, as usual, Scotland can actually block stuff. It can block kind of all sorts of
like
stuff.
with fracking.
So we
where-
block
Exactly. So
fracking,
officially we're not covering that area, but in reality, but instead, the Scottish Government welcomes all the new kind of oil fields and so on, understandably, because it's within the old paradigm of we'll get benefit that way, and it's not taking on the new situation, which we need to really... We could transform all that industry into renewables. We could have a really cutting-edge future industry that is really successful and effective. We can go right ahead by transforming it, which is what Robin's saying, and what the Common Home programme's all about, is actually shifting to a whole different approach. We don't have to shoot ourselves in the foot, but we can stop shooting ourselves in the head.
Yeah, I mean, again, thinking back to the launch of that Our Common Home plan, I was sort of really struck when Robin said, well, it's one big engineering project, and what is it that Scots have always been really good at? And we all went, engineering, and pipes, and I mean, that was just it was quite funny, but it was sort of uplifting at the same time.
Well, that's one half of it, but there's another
what's
half.
the other?
You were talking about two halves.